What's up, guys? Today we're going over the new rocket damage perks, Frenzy, Lasting Impression, and also Cluster Bombs, and be going over which one is the highest for DPS, and kind of doing a mini review on the code Duello, which is the new Battlegrounds rocket launcher. And when this video goes live, I'll be streaming on Twitch for a few hours, so come and watch it. Link in the description. And if you miss out on this stream, go ahead and follow, that way you don't miss out on the next one. And since this is my first damage test video this season, they updated the base level of the game to 1100, which means we now hit higher numbers on Carl than we did before by roughly 44.8%. So all the numbers will be inflated by that percent compared to previous seasons testing, which is kind of unfortunate. Usually every DLC, the base level of the game goes up, but for whatever reason, they're going up by 50 every season now, which means the Carl numbers are a little bit higher. Another thing about Carl is he is a major. As you see with major spec on my SMG, the numbers go up. If you put on boss spec, they'll stay the same. And the reason that is important is because legendary rockets used to do 20% more damage to majors than bosses, but it appears now that they do the exact same damage to bosses and majors. I'm definitely going to do a little bit more testing on that information in the future, but it appears whatever they did to rocket launchers with this update made it so they do the same damage to majors and bosses. And before we start breaking down all the new rocket damage perks, a quick word from our video sponsor. This video is sponsored by a return sponsor, Wondershare. If you're trying to get into becoming a YouTuber or even something like TikTok, this app that they just launched, Vidip, might be perfect for you. It has all the editing features you would ever need on a mobile device, just like Filmora Go, but now with new filters and effects added on top, including two very cool ones, Super Zoom and also Particle Effects, almost just like a Snapchat filter. The Super Zoom is actually really funny. I enjoyed pretty much all of them. As you see right here, I did one with one of my raid belts. And also the Particle Effects, you can make pretty much anything come out of your mouth. You can change your face, your eyes, anything like that, and make your videos have a more fun atmosphere if you're uploading to Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is. If this is something that interests you and you want to download this app, right now it's only in beta on the Google Play Store on Android. And you can go ahead and click the link in the description to download it straight from there. And while you're at it, since it is a beta, go ahead and leave a review on the Google Play Store, which will help them make the app better for the future. Once again, click the link in the comments and description to download Vidip for free. And thanks to Wondershare for sponsoring this video. So if we look at the base damage on this rocket launcher, it's looking for these two numbers right here. And keep in mind, these numbers are going to be a lot higher than previous seasons at 73,107, which is quite a lot. Rockets have always hit pretty hard. And now we start with the old classic Cluster Bombs and see what that does, then compare it to the new perks. All the testing in this video will be with impact casing on it, which should increase the impact damage by 10%. Looking at damage on Carl with clusters, it's going to be kind of random. On average, I found that the clusters hit twice per explosion. On Carl, obviously bigger bosses, it might be a little bit better. And even sometimes on Carl's, the clusters hit less than twice, so it's kind of random, but let's just say on average on Carl it's gonna hit twice. That will leave us at 77,559, which is gonna be a 6.1% increase to the total damage of the rocket. Then we look at the new perk Frenzy. Being in combat for extended time increases damage, handling, and reload for this weapon until you are out of combat. And I'm not going to be breaking down exactly how this perk works in this video. I'll be making a separate video on Frenzy alone. But once we have the perk procced and shoot at Carl, the numbers will be a lot higher now, at a total of 87,728, which is going to be a 20% increase as long as you have the perk procced. So right there alone, that is already much higher than Cluster Bombs and a lot more consistent as long as you have the perk procced. Then the final new damage perk, Lasting Impression. Rockets attach on impact and detonate after a delay, increase blast radius and damage. So when you shoot this at Carl, it'll first do the impact damage, but then it'll explode almost 3 entire seconds later, and the explosion will do a lot of damage for a grand total of 87,017, which is going to be a 19% increase, so a little bit lower than the Frenzy perk, but a lot more consistent because you'll have that perk at all times, unlike Frenzy where you're going to have to be in combat, and on some boss fights that might not happen. Another cool thing about this perk is, since the rocket doesn't explode right away, you can stick someone right next to them, almost like a Scorch Cannon, then run away and let it explode. Also, since the explosion is on a delay, you can use something like Divinity and pretty much buff your own rocket damage for every single shot. So as you can imagine, you could use something like auto-loading holster, then shoot the rocket, pull out Div, wait for it to explode. That way you buff your own rocket damage, then by then it will auto-reload, and you can do that over and over again. Which brings me to the perks in the left slot. Obviously, first, as we just mentioned, auto-loading and holster would work really well for solo play with Div and something like that, or even pairing it with Iznagi's Burden. Then we also have Surplus, which will increase not only the reload speed, but also the handling and stability, which for Rocket isn't that important. Which leads me to what is probably the best left perk, Field Prep, which will give you increased reload speed, then also increased reserves. And usually with this rocket you hold 7 in the reserves, but with field prep it goes all the way up to 9, so 2 extra rockets of damage is quite a lot. And the other new perk in the left slot is going to be Impulse Amplifier, which will massively increase the projectile velocity and increase the reload speed. And if you remember, Mountaintop had a perk that increased the velocity, which caused it to do a lot more damage on impact. And if we test the same thing with this, it does not work the same way. It does not increase the damage of either the impact or the explosion. So this perk does not increase damage in any way. So overall, field prep or auto loading is pretty much the way to go in the left slot, depending on what you're trying to do. If you're just using the rocket alone, field prep. But if you're pairing it with someone else, you'd probably want to use auto loading. Now look in the rate of fire of 2 rockets using field prep to get like a burst DPS number. Depending on which damage perk you're using, with Frenzy, it would go all the way up to 82,762, which is quite a lot. But remember, these numbers are 44.8% higher than they were in previous seasons. So if we convert it back to how it was before, it'd be roughly 45,500, which is not too bad compared to a lot of things in the game right now in the heavy slot. That is pretty much on par with some of the best options. Then we look at the rate of fire over 5 rockets, which will be more like the sustained DPS number. It's going to take quite a bit longer, at roughly 8.5 seconds, which means the DPS falls to just over 50,000 with Frenzy and Lasting Impression. And once again, these numbers are 44.8% higher than previous numbers. So in old number terms, that would be just under 30,000. So as you can see, these DPS numbers on rockets fall off pretty heavily once you have to start reloading multiple times. The great thing about field prep, as mentioned, is the 2 extra rockets. So with no reserve perks, we hold 9, and with double reserves, we go to 11, which will put you somewhere between 790,000 and 965,000 total damage output, which is obviously pretty good. So overall, which rocket perk is the best? Well, Frenzy is the highest at 20%, while Last Impression is only 19%. But the thing is, Last Impression will always be there, and it's not something that you have to proc or anything like that, compared to Frenzy, where on some boss fights, it might be extremely easy to have Frenzy up at all times, but then for other boss fights, you might not have it going into it because there's nothing shooting at you, you're not shooting at anything else, you're not in combat, so you might not have that 20% until you're multiple rockets into the fight, whereas with Lasting Impression, you will have that 19% for every single shot. The only trade-off of Lasting Impression is that the damage itself is on a delay, which doesn't necessarily decrease the DPS because you can still be shooting more and more rockets while waiting for the first one or second one to explode, or even once you get to the last rocket, you can then swap to someone else and shoot like a sniper, a shotgun, whatever it is. So it doesn't really decrease your DPS because you can still be doing stuff while waiting, but if it's a tight DPS phase where the boss goes immune, you know, the last rocket might not explode before they go immune or die, so the last rocket might be kind of useless. And then you have Cluster Bomb, which is kind of like Last Impression, where you will always have the damage, but it's very RNG dependent, depending on how like the spread goes. Sometimes it might not hit at all, and sometimes it might hit even like 4 times, depending on how big the boss is. But overall, no matter how many times it hits, it will never be as high as a percent as the Frenzy or Lasting Impression. So pretty much Lasting Impression is always going to be better than Cluster. Then depending on the boss fight, if you can get Frenzy, Frenzy will be the best of all 3. So overall, the God roll, if you're just looking to use the rocket and the rocket alone, be Field Prep and Frenzy, or Field Prep and Lasting Impression. Then if you're going to be like the Divinity user for your raid team, or you're going to try to pair it with Izanagi's Burden or something like that, you'd want auto loading, then also Lasting Impression, or auto loading and Frenzy. Anyways, I think that's gonna be it for the video. Once again, thanks to Wondershare for sponsoring this video. I plan on doing more sponsored videos in the future. I'll never get to the point where they're gonna be like thrown down your throat 24/7 like every single video. You know, there might be a handful a month, and doing that will really help me be able to upload more in the early months of the year when the YouTube ad rate pretty much plummets, and also in the smaller seasons throughout the year where I don't really upload as often. This will really help me be able to upload more during those times. So I definitely appreciate you guys sticking through and watching those out. And yeah, thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.